So, a very good morning to all our Changemakers. Today, we have a guest who is into sustainable living and she is making the effort in the form of food. I'm very happy and very excited to invite Kavitha Garu. She is the chief curator and the founder of Green Organics. And also, most people might be knowing of a restaurant called Sage. Very happy to introduce Kavitha Garu. Welcome on the show, Kavitha. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks, Vamsi. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. So we'll jump straight to it as usual. If you can just tell us a brief of where your journey started into looking at the sustainable space.
So we moved back to India in about 2014 with a very active intention of farming. Initially, the intention was just to sort of make our own family sustainable, where we had two young kids at that time, about 3 and 5 years old. And understanding our own food production and what we were consuming, it always comes into highlight when you have children, when you're sort of responsible for other people. So we started off with sort of getting a parcel of land and starting farming for our own self. We were quite lucky that through our journey as we were setting up, we had the pleasure of engaging with incredible amount of people who were knowledgeable and engaged in farming already. And also an existing store at that point in time, which was desperately struggling because times were changing. Corporates were moving into the whole organic field, and the whole intent of what farmer-based produce was changing dramatically. So we sort of hitched our wagon to theirs and started Sage in 2016 with the very intention of making lifestyle choice as to how you were consuming. The idea isn't just about, is it farm produce? All food comes from a farm at the end of the day. So to say farm to table hardly starts to actually define a lifestyle that's sustainable. But when you talk about sustainability, also engaging in the understanding of what is seasonal, what is local, what is the best way to use things, what is nature trying to tell us, and what is the best way that we can create a situation where there is no food crisis for us in the long run. It started off with creating a grocery store which had these lifestyle products available, as well as selling vegetables that we do on our own farm, as well as farms around us from farmers that whose processes we understood. And eventually in 2017, leading to the creation of Sage Farm Cafe. Which is now really was the first farm-to-table cafe in Hyderabad, but genuinely engages and promotes sustainability and local produce.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to get more into Sage for sure, but just a step before that, great how the focus went into the farming, but what was the driving thought behind? I mean, why did you feel the pressing need for you to look at this space when you got back?
So we moved here from Singapore, and as much as Singapore is known for incredibly efficient living, Singapore doesn't grow anything on their own. Everything that you get in Singapore, including the milk that you buy in the stores, is being flown thousands of miles to you. Most people consume milk that comes from Australia. Now just imagine that. You and I living in Hyderabad would not even consider milk that came from Andhra Pradesh, let alone Bangalore or Delhi. And we're talking about whole continents across which produce is being flown through and is being sold as fresh and viable. There is a systemic issue with how we perceive freshness. And what is genuinely fresh and real and close to you. And I think that knowledge of knowing that we were so far from what we were actually consuming, and the carbon footprint of every single thing that actually went into making our life viable, it was very, very prominent in a place like Singapore, where at least you know that the quality is being maintained. At the end of the day, there is some ISO check, there's some quality check, quality assurance of what you're actually consuming. Then as we consider the move to India, even that quality check is actually at its minimal. Although your carbon footprint is dramatically lower. The quality of produce that you're getting in, there is really no proper oversight. There's no continued processes or engagement or knowledge that's being passed on to ensure that that quality is being maintained. And there was such a huge concern as to what we might actually be putting into our body, that you can't really say you're in health and wellness until you have a sense of what is going into your mouth at the end of the day. I can look fabulous. We were talking about weight gain during the COVID times and things like that. I think India has this huge foray into fitness. Yeah. But fitness has nothing to do with health and wellness. And there's so little emphasis on health and wellness, which is entirely dependent on what you're consuming. You are what you eat. And whether I look skinny or fat or obese or healthy, what I'm putting inside my body and what is happening to my internal systems is a whole different story. And when we talk about health and wellness, it's really about that internalization, mind, body, soul, all of that. And that's why sort of controlling it became a very critical aspect of what we wanted to do, as long as health and wellness was a focus for us.
That's very interesting. I mean, getting to the actual word, almost listening to it everywhere, I'm sure you feel that as well. The word organic now is just taken off. I mean, it's great marketing, I suppose, and high time as well. And what's your take on that? What is the whole concept of, what do you think India thinks or people in Hyderabad think of what organic actually is and the way of living?
So, it's interesting you bring that up, Vamsi, because it's actually one of the words that I despise the most, because it is just, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's an incredible marketing jargon. And we have a tendency to take on our passions and our swings from the West a few years down. And of course, in the US, the organic wave has been a huge thing. And now we're all into the whole organic thing. And anything we want and anything we do has to be organic for us to show that, we're actually conscious and aware. Having said that, very few people actually understand what organic is as it stands in the US, where it's highly regulated, FDA regulations, very consciously monitored. Organic, if you start to actually read it, says very little, is very limitedly different from your pesticide-based farming. Basically, what organic indicates is that although you have used pesticides, the level of residue left on your produce is below some arbitrary level. And so someone else is deciding that actually if you have quarter teaspoon of the poison, that's okay. It's only when you get to 1 teaspoon of poison are you going to start to harm yourself. I find that completely incorrigible. I don't think I think there's a black and there's a white. And organic, unfortunately, operates in that hugely gray area. And even if you start reading regulations in the US with regards to organic, it simply is a set of recommended guidelines rather than a required set of practices, where it says where possible. These are terms that make it into the actual definition of how you qualify yourself as organic. So now in a place like US, where things are so regulated, if things are that loose, you can imagine in India how challenging it would be for you to maintain anything that's organic. So once your farm has been certified organic, that's it, you're set. You can do whatever you want. And there's a huge trend now between people who claim to be organic farmers, who will, when you ask them, they'll say, oh, I neem pedta hu, aau pedda pedta hu, all of that stuff. I'm using cow dung, I'm using neem leaves. Everything that I feed to the soil is very, very natural. But yes, of course, when there's an infestation on my brinjal, I have to spray it because otherwise it will go on to my other produce. That's a problem, because frankly, if you introduce something into a soil, at least by the time it gets to your vegetable, the concentration levels are fewer. When you're spraying the produce directly, the concentration is very, very high. So you claimed yourself as being an organic producer, but actually what you're giving the end produce that's coming out is completely different. So what we try and do, and the education that we're trying to get across to people, is that there is natural and then there is organic. And in natural, no pesticide ever, no chemical pesticide. Of course, there are pesticides, right? We make pesticides out of cow pee, cow dung, and all these kind of natural materials, but no chemical-based pesticide ever enters the equation. And that's a very, very critical requirement that we need to get out. And this is where I worry that natural farming is actually, India is the home of natural farming. This is what we did until we were introduced to all these pesticides. So what we're trying to do is go back to what was originally ours, was done perfectly well. Like your parents' generation and your grandparents' generation will laugh when you say organic, because to them, they did much more than that back in the day. They never knew any other way of farming. But today we've moved so far away from that what we're really trying to do is get people to understand that organic is not good enough. You have to know where your produce is coming from. You have to understand the practices of the farms where the produce is coming from. And you need to make sure that it's as close to natural farming as possible. Only then you're actually an engaged and conscious consumer.
That's very interesting, and I'm very happy that you took the time out to actually explain the difference. I'm sure not many people are aware of that. Going to the actual farming point of it, right? So you said sometime back you actually bought a patch of land and you started cultivating. How was that experience? I mean, from Singapore to directly going to a farmland and getting the produce. What was the whole experience in actually getting your first crop?
So I think we've been very, very blessed. Both me and my husband had incredible passion to get into farming, but really not the right knowledge. And we were very lucky that right through our journey, we had the benefit of acquiring and partnering with people who were able to bring that knowledge onto the ground. We started off with just about 100 square feet of land in the 17 acres, where we just had a watchman living in the house. Very typical farm life story where threw a few seeds in and saw what came out. We then, within 6 months of actually acquiring the farm, were able to get in a manager who had agricultural experience, who then took that 100 square feet to about half an acre. And I still remember the first crop that we got was brinjal. Now, brinjal is not everybody's favorite vegetable and it's quite controversial like that. But what was really interesting was that when we first started sharing our brinjal crop, even people that you didn't expect it from, like a lot of the husbands of my wives would come back and say, my God, that brinjal was so amazing, which is not something, you don't think of brinjal as, oh my God, people are going to identify the difference. But it was so motivating for us right at the beginning to realize that people were able to identify the difference in the produce that we were giving them. The other thing that we did a lot of was, even though our crop output is much lower, we tried to stick to native seeds as much as possible. What happens with native seeds is your yield is much, much lower, but the flavor component and the nutritional value tends just be that much more higher. That feedback initially of people recognizing the difference in a vegetable like brinjal was very, very positive for us and sort of made us want to take that next step. Of course, after a couple of weeks, every time people saw us, they ran in the opposite direction because they knew we were going to give them a bag of brinjal. But from that half-acre experiment, we had the opportunity of tying up with permaculture expert who then started to bring his own team on, and I started to focus more on the cafe and the store, and he was able to focus on developing the farm. So we went from there to about 3 to 4 acres of production. And we now have one of the foremost experts in agriculture and permaculture who, our intent was that farming was never meant to be done with the intent of just growing produce, but really learning on the right ways to do it. Worked with permaculture and all of its practices for about a couple of years. And since last year, we've been focusing specifically on soil regeneration. One of the biggest issues is that in all the craziness of growing our produce and getting greater yields, we've sort of forgotten that the nutritional value of food really comes in from the nutritional value of your soil, because at the end of the day, that's where everything is being pulled from. So if you take care of the soil, your produce in the long run will take care of itself. But we can't grow things with the intent of getting a yield and just give basic inputs to the soil. Instead, you really, really work on the soil, and over the long run, you'll end up getting incredible amount of produce. So We've had a really interesting journey with our current farm manager, Mr. Uday Kumar, who's really changed the profile of our soil. A year back, the penetration of the soil was about an inch or 2 inches, and that sort of tells you where the nutrition value comes from, because at the end of the day, if your penetration is low, the root system finds it harder to go deeper down and get more nutrition value. And now we're at about 18 inches. So that ability of your, there's so many other things that come into play when your root system has a deeper access to the soil. And that's sort of been the journey that we've been on now producing about 40 to 50 different types of produce in our own farm. We also raise our own chicken, which are all free range, and we have about 3-4 breeds that we do that, cows, buffaloes, a complete ecosystem in place.
That's wonderful. I think I just want to, can't stop thinking about India as an agricultural country, right? The whole, the strength, as we mentioned earlier, India was known for agriculture. And unfortunately, because of land parcels available, the people that, the farmers that have been really abused over the years, how do you feel? If I can, I think you yourself have become a farmer now, actually, getting into the farmland and ground. How do you feel the system can change in terms of, life for a farmer? Like, it's always a controversial issue that farmers are always in trouble, farmer suicides. The list is just way too much. How do you feel with your little, shift in lines of life that a farmer can benefit for our country?
It's a whole cycle that, you can sort of start anywhere you want, but I like to start with the consumer. And the whole intent behind creating Sage, as I mentioned before, was to genuinely impart an education as to what seasonal produce is. The thing is, most people who have grown up eating gongura have grown up eating either gongura pachari or gongura pappu. That's all they eat gongura with, right? And so it gets associated with a certain type of cuisine, and we leave it at that. Now, one of the things that has happened is, over the period of time, those of us that are privileged and are wealthy, who really drive the system at the end of the day, in terms of produce and procurement, etc. You will only buy 1 or 2 bunches of gongura to have your pappu and pachri in a day. But gongura is growing in abundance because this is our crop. This is the thing that we grow with our eyes closed. You can throw those seeds in the back of your garden, walk away, come back a month later, you'll have that, right? So what we have tried to do is say, you know what, you can also make a salad with gongura because it has such a beautiful flavor that you don't then have to put your lemon inside because it's already come in through the savannas that comes through the gongura. So one of the things that we try to do is people have to understand how to use local produce in ways that fill into their current global lifestyle, because our global lifestyle is that we don't eat South Indian food every single day of the meal. Most of you guys, especially, even in my generation, definitely in your generation, my kids' generation, they want to have their Italian, they want to have their Mexican, they want to have their Indian occasionally interspersed with all of that. So now, first thing we've got to do is look at, can we take our local produce and still make all of those different cuisines of food? And that's really where Sage Farm Cafe comes in, with what we're trying to do in terms of getting people to get to that knowledge and for them to physically see. If I can make a spicy Thai salad with a gongura leaf, then maybe you would be encouraged, or a beetroot salad, which is a very quintessential Italian salad. Add a little bit of zinc to it with gongura and get you to actually incorporate it in different aspects of your life. Or Asian food, in fact. Gongura is a very prominent Asian leaf. You'll see the Chinese eating it all the time, but we don't tend to actually include it in Chinese food at all. So we created an Asian dish which includes that. So the first thing we have to do is understand what our local produce is, what is available in abundance, and look at how it can fit into our global lifestyle, where we're able to incorporate these ingredients into different aspects of the variety of cuisines we've gotten used to eating. So I'm not just eating beans, but I'm eating beans with a little bit of gongura inside because it will add a little bit of a kick to it. So understanding that seasonality is very critical, because only when we start to increase that consumption of seasonal produce, will the farmer be supported? The second level of it is understanding genuine seasonality. Look, cauliflower being eaten in the middle of summer is not right. It was not meant to be a summer produce. It's really a winter produce, a cold weather produce. Now, any farmer who's going through the effort of growing that for you is spending a lot more money than you're willing to actually spend on it. In terms of buying it. So the thing is that your average farmer doesn't think about their inputs. At the end of the day, all they're getting is, oh my God, okay, once my tomato crop comes in, I'll get 10 rupees per kilo. He's not looking at how much time I spent on it. There's no time value. There's minimal costing in terms of the inputs that he's actually put in. So we have to be able to understand this is a seasonal vegetable. This is what we're getting a lot of. If Birakai is in season now, and why is Birakai in season now? Because the summers were all about gourds, because gourds tend to retain a lot more water. And when it's hot, water is actually good for your body. So our seasonal produce actually already naturally takes care of our own immunity and our health. So if we can find ways in which we can actually incorporate that into our food, and that's what Sage Farm Cafe does, is teaching people how to do that, then the store makes sure that that is what is coming in. So I'm not going to go crazy trying to procure kale. If you come to our store and you try to get vegetables, you will only get the local vegetables, because that's really the intent of what we're trying to do. Now, we will teach you how to use those vegetables, but you have to understand that this is what is in season, this is what is available. So through our store, then we try and procure those local produce that are grown seasonally at that point in time, because then we're supporting the farmer, making sure that he gets the right share. Now, and an average what happens in a market is for every 50 rupees of tomato, 10 rupees goes to the actual farmer. The 40 rupees goes along the way. We try and make sure, obviously, our costing is for our store, etc., tends to be high, but we make sure at least 50%, a minimum of 50% of every rupee spent by the customer goes directly to the farmer. So it makes it viable for them to actually engage with this produce. And then slowly that cycle begins. But at the end of the day, it has to start with, we are trying to meet a requirement. And unless we change that requirement and how it comes to us, all of the rest of the system trying to feed into it becomes challenging. So that's sort of our model of trying to impact it. It's a slow way of doing it. But 3 years on, we can definitely see that we've gotten traction, and we hope that we can continue the work.
That's really amazing. Actually, I've learned a lot in the last 5 minutes of what you explained. Actually, you're very right in the sense that we don't tend to think, why am I eating this vegetable in this season or time? I think starting with me and a lot more people who have visited Sage, I think the awareness must definitely increase. And in fact, let's talk a little bit about what's happening around the COVID, right? It's the COVID times, and it's very unfortunate and very, very bad news for most businesses, especially the restaurant and the food business. So what has been your experience of the last 2 months with the whole COVID situation?
Even though we fall in essential services, so we haven't actually closed at any point in time. The store has operated right through this period. To say anything other than the fact that it's been challenging would be trying to camouflage what really happened. It's not just the issue of the illness, but how it impacted several things, transport. We have, obviously, a lot of our farmers live in different villages. The first thing that happened was that the villages blocked themselves out. There was complete lockdown where no produce could come in, nothing could come in or go out. So there was the first couple of weeks where we weren't even sure we were able to supply vegetables, even though we were deemed essentials and had all the permissions required to actually operate. We were fortunate that our own farm happens to be on a main road, which was not blocked out as the exit. So we were at least able to get produce in and out of our own farm. But a lot of our farmer friends that we work with were not as fortunate. I think one of the issues was that information that was sent along the way was very, very challenging. There are other issues, like because we work with smaller farmers, not just in Telangana and Andhra, in different places also, We don't have produce that comes in large bulk. Now, Ratnadeep can get in a whole truck of its vegetables from anywhere because they own the supply chain. I depend on a public transport bus that ferries from Vizag to here to get me a little box of something that I want. So we got hit very dramatically in terms of the curated produce that we tend to hold at our store. So those were struggles in terms of procurement. The cafe industry has been hit very, very dramatically. And frankly, to be honest, as much as dine-in has been challenging and people have not been coming out, I think from a cafe perspective, we have to understand there's a huge effort that F&B is doing in trying to convince people that it's safe to come out and eat. But at the end of the day, my whole concern is in terms of preserving the sanctity of my own staff who might come in, as long as we are in a closed setup, you can take care of your own people. But the moment we increase interaction with others, we're actually putting our own people at risk as well. So dining has gotten huge challenges in terms of getting us to worry about our own safety, forget about what we're then passing on. Because at the end of the day, if I know I am safe and my people are safe,
Sure.
I can assure your safety. But the moment that interaction between you and me increases, I don't know who's coming in, and that becomes really scary. So it's been one of those chicken and egg things of, do we focus on increasing our business or do we just focus on being safe and just staying sustainable to the extent possible? What we've been able to do, which is quite interesting, is that while we have the store, we have the vegetables, we have got the groceries, and we have the cafe, which obviously is a dine-in, takeaway and everything. Obviously, we've resumed takeaways entirely. We've tried to limit dine-ins as much as possible, and everything's on a self-service because I'm trying to create a barricade between my own staff and anybody who comes in from outside. But we also have a large part of our store which is production. We create a lot of produce. So we've had to innovate during the COVID times to really think about, look, the customer is not going to feel comfortable coming out and eating. So how can we get our own food across to them in a place where they can eat it in a safe environment? So obviously there's the cooked food aspect of it where they can take away. But we also started to do a whole bunch of kits where they can make it home. So we have now pizza kits where they can actually roll out the pizza in the comfort of their own home, cook it in their own place. So, once the food is cooked in your own house, there's no risk to it. Then they have the comfort of actually eating that. And we've increased the ingredients that we sell. So if you want to make a pizza on your own, I'll sell the sauce to you. You buy the mozzarella from us, you buy the cheeses from us, you buy the chutneys from us, and you make something interesting for yourself. And we constantly keep putting out recipes to customers so that they have that comfort of doing it at their own home. I think while during the COVID period, we were all disappointed and closed, the genuine fatality of what is about to come is only starting to get evident right now. The first of the restaurants have started shutting down. And at a point like this, there are two things that any business has to focus on. One is you've got to keep your expenses down because there's no other way to survive this. Business is not going to be anywhere close to the extent that we had before. But you've got to innovate. You've got to figure out how you're going to be relevant in a scenario like this. And luckily for us, the style of food that we do, the reputation that Sage has, it makes us even more relevant at this point in time. So we're hoping that if we're conscious of our costs and stay sustainable, we can sort of ride out some of the ill effects of COVID and what it brings with it.
That's actually really wonderful. I'm really amazed. I didn't know actually that Sage is now doing the kits. I think that would be a real game changer in terms of creating the awareness also, what you were talking about earlier. Especially with the whole COVID situation, I think definitely it has happened to me and my family. And people are getting more aware of what they eat, if it's healthy. I'm sure you would have seen these immunity recipes that are floating around. So, and it's great that you're making kits and we can actually buy natural foods from Sage outlets. Is there a convenient way online, or do you have subscription models that are going on?
The best way to sort of keep in touch with our products is to follow us on Instagram handle or Facebook, which is Sage Sustainable Living. In terms of ordering our produce, we have a website called www.sageorganics.in, and that's a great way to actually order produce from us. But I think, speaking about the whole relevance aspect, I think the one thing COVID has taught us is that no matter whether the vaccine comes in, you get medication, you have the benefit of effective hospitalization or not, it is at the end of the day about your own immunity. And this is what we were talking about earlier on, that what the way you build your immunity is not going to be just based on those immunity shots that you take now. I can start popping in as much ginger and fresh turmeric as I want right now and hope that it'll help cure any issues that come in. But am I healthy? Am I genuinely taken care of? Do I have strong lungs? Do I have strong kidneys? Does my system inside function well? And those are all long-term lifestyle choices that impact things like that. And that's why the relevance of something that, like what we do, is so critical, because let's face it, it's COVID today, and if we're lucky, we'll go through another decade before something else comes in, but something else will come in, because that's the sort of environment and world that we're living in, where things move from one place to another so rapidly. When the plague came, it impacted Europe because movement was limited. Today, you can just see something that started in Wuhan, land up across the entire world. So it is going to spread to all of us. So taking care of our health in the long run is going to be a very active choice that we make.
Ultimately, living very true to the saying, what we eat is what we are, I think.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Kavitha Garu, for doing this. I really enjoyed it, and I must very honestly say I learned a lot about sustainably eating or living healthy, and I will definitely look up the Sage kits. I'm very excited because as I'm probably sure you've heard a lot. All of us have started cooking at home, and we've started doing our own things. So it'll be very exciting to look up what Sage is offering and definitely endorse it. So thank you so much for doing this and coming on our show. Thank you.
Thank you, Vamsi. It was a pleasure talking to you.